thyself. The most favorite words of the Greek philosopher Socrates are written on the temple of the Oracle in ancient Greece. Discovery of the self is the most valuable and the most rewarding gift of life. It is a shift in awareness. It is coming out of a certain type of life frame and stepping into another in which we open our eyes, simply look around, and feel so enlightened and so blessed. In the realization of the self, a person moves step by step into new dimensions of self-awareness and actually personal comprehension of his behavior at the various levels of consciousness. He observes himself as he really is, exposing himself to the self. Self-realization is the ability to see beyond the masks of our own personality into the innermost activities of our mind, aspirations, desires, and complexities of our nature. Those interfere with our spontaneous, natural way of living a peaceful and happy life. It is the ability to examine the interaction of our feelings and reason, to analyze our thought and emotions, and to negotiate with different circumstances of life adequately, peacefully, with wisdom and proper insight. Self-realization is the experiential knowledge of the various levels of our consciousness, such as the conditioned self and the supreme self. Conditioned self is the totality of experiences, thoughts, latencies, and sanskaras from present, past, and many previous lives. Even at the time of death, when the physical body perishes, the conditioned self goes from one body to another, forced by thoughts and memories. Journey of the conditioned self is ever renewing on the path of eternity. The process of understanding its nature is very difficult because the masks of the conditioned self are the various interconnected events of life, following each other in a certain order. Almost every experience of life has its origin in the one which existed before. If we really closely observe the entire lifespan, it is just a bundle of some thoughts and memories. Every moment of life becomes a memory. Last week, yesterday, and until last few hours of even today, every moment has become an experience which has been duly recorded and saved in the memory bank of subtle body, the conditioned self. It is the slavery of our conditioned behavior which presides over the entire course of life. Every single moment in life has been pre-designed to some extent, such as happiness, unhappiness, sufferings, and blessings, good times and bad times, all appear and disappear in a certain order. It is indeed so true that it is the conditioned behavior enclosed in the memories of past which expresses itself as conditioned self. Everyone in the world is moving as if programmed in a certain software of latencies, memories, thoughts, and sanskaras. This software can be called the conditioned self. Every new birth is an expression of the respective data programmed in the software. The entire creation is an expression of the conditioned behavior ruled by mind, intellect, and ego. People check in this world with some baggage of new dreams, new desires, and also check out with some baggage because of their additional shopping in every new life. Each person in this universe is moving alone on the path of eternity with a specific goal in mind. Most of this behavior is quite conditioned and quite unknown to the person himself. It happens quite compulsively and helplessly. Almost every single person moves around bonded by the self-imposed conditions and limitations. The slavery of the conditioned self is not realized by people in general, and that's why they become poor victims of their conditioned habits. They live in ignorance, really without realizing their legitimate potentials. The realization of the self as the master of the universe is definitely missed by ignorant, but it is distinctly realized by the man of wisdom who has learned to live in the awareness of the Supreme Soul and can perceive the difference between the ordinary conditioned awareness and the pure, luminous, cosmic awareness. It is unrestricted apprehension and subjective experience of the Supreme Reality at a heightened level of consciousness which creates, nurtures, and sustains the entire universe. The realization of the presence of the Supreme Soul beyond the slavery of our conditioned behavior is perceived only when we are able to develop a conscious relationship with the indwelling soul and understand the essential difference between the conditioned self and the Supreme Self. It is only in unity with the pure, luminous nature of the soul we are able to rise above the slavery of our conditioned behavior and are liberated from the false identifications of ego and the masks of the conditioned self. The moment when we are introduced to our essential nature as the knower of the conditioned self, we live as a spectator, as a witness, and actually give ourselves a chance for self-analysis and self-improvement. We are educated about the essential difference of the conditioned self and the Supreme Self, and that is when our real education begins. Self-realization is to be able to realize the self as the witness of all activities of mind and body. It is to have a clear understanding between the thought and the one who is aware of the thought. It is really important to remember that human life is a great gift of God. Human beings are blessed with the subjective awareness of the Supreme Soul. Every person has the potential to experience the presence of God and receive the sufficient guidance for self-realization and self-discovery. The knowledge of the self is within the access of every human being. It is not something to be acquired from somebody else. It actually needs to be revealed to us from our own inner resources. The knowledge of the Supreme Soul and the proper understanding of the conditioned self becomes foreign to us because of our own negligence and ignorance. Sometimes people suffer all their lives without realizing their potentials to change the quality of life. They feel they are being forced to live by chance and not by choice. They are always confused and mixed about the realities of life. Even if they have the ability and capacity to change, their efforts are not integrated properly. The human life, instead of being an opportunity for spiritual growth, self-realization, and liberation, proves to be a failure to some extent. Self-discovery is the progressive realization from the conscious state of mind to the superconscious, from the conditioned finite awareness to the infinite awareness. It is only when we move beyond the limitations of egocentric self and the masks of the conditioned self, we can become enlightened about the misalignment in our behavior, and we are blessed with sufficient guidance about improving the quality of day-to-day life. It is indeed a fact that it is the experiential knowledge of the Supreme Self which enlightens the person about the reality of his conditioned habits and also brings a shift from bondage to freedom. Each new life brings an opportunity for self-realization and the discovery of life in itself. Those who make effort, they regain their lost empire and are definitely liberated from the masks of their conditioned nature. But those who don't realize their slavery, they are pushed along helplessly by their memories and sanskara. They keep revolving in the cycle of self-created problems and conflicts. The pursuit for liberation starts with a conscious shift in our thoughts. When we start questioning why my life is so conditioned, why every event takes place so helplessly, why I feel bound by destiny and pushed along helplessly by circumstances beyond my control. The pursuit and inquiry gives us the clue of bondage, and then we make efforts for knowing more about ourselves, and that is when the realization of the self begins. I like what J. Krishnamurti used to say, self-knowledge is the beginning of wisdom. In self-knowledge is the whole universe. It embraces all the struggles of humanity. He is so right, because our relation to everything and with everybody around us depends upon our relationship with our own inner self. It is indeed a fact that human potentials are enormous. We have the ability to change the roles which we play in life. All of this can be very easily achieved with the constant, devoted repetition of mantra. Mantra repetition strengthens our relationship with the indwelling self and also works as a tool to know more about ourselves and also to discover our dramatic course of life. By self-study, we can easily discover the area of agreement as well as the disagreement within our own personality. When the self-imposed conditioning is eliminated with constant mantra jap, the pure self shines in its absolute purity. I like these words of Lao Tzu, a great Chinese philosopher. He says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. I will repeat it again. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. It requires a great deal of courage and self-discipline and willingness to improve the quality of life by remaining watchful and alert about the activities of mind and body. Understanding of the self is a continuous process, evolving around the experiences of daily life. Each experience of life is very educational and offers an opportunity to learn something new and better. Nothing is lost in the programmed data of our memory bank. Every experience is carefully watched, recorded, and saved all along. The present experience of life is an extension of something which happened in past, and it is also stretching its strings for events in future. We are always picking up the scattered pieces wherever they were left previously. Mantra jap evolves around a remarkable way of exploring our personality at the conscious as well as the subconscious levels. It enlightens the person about the complexities of mind and helps him to screen the reality through constant guidance from the indwelling self. With our constant connectedness with the source of life, we become more aware of the options available to us and have more conscious control of our lives. I am saying all this because usually we don't even try to understand ourselves any better than the way we are, the way we feel, and the way we act. Generally, people say life has never been fair to anybody. Or they generally repeat, Nanak dukhiya sab sansar, without thinking about the next line of this verse, which is, Wo sukhiya jis naam adhar. The first half of this verse means that life is full of pain, sorrows, and misery. But the second half asserts that anyone who lives in unity with God and is soaked in the spirit of Naam Jap, he is definitely happy and peaceful. It is really so true that most of us have accepted to live a life like anybody else around, and we are settled in our own self-created web. We are so used to live a complex and unhappy life that we have almost forgotten the taste of a peaceful, harmonious, relaxed, happy life. We keep ourselves trapped in our self-created webs and live a life of bondage and pain until we are introduced to the essentiality of our pure, unconditioned, luminous nature. I like what Emerson used to say. Every man supposes himself not to be fully understood. And if there is any truth in him, if he rests at last on the divine soul, I don't see how it can be otherwise. the last chamber, the last closet, he must realize was never opened. There is always a residue, unknown, unanalyzable. Sometimes this awakening happens by chance. For example, a serious illness and some other painful incident in life gives us the opportunity to become introduced to our inner intelligence, and we are helped to know more about ourselves and others. This reminds me of an incident from the life story of Lucille Blake as described by Dale Carnegie. He met Lucille years ago when both of them were studying in the Columbia School of Journalism. One morning she collapsed. It was a heart attack, and the doctor told her to lie in bed for at least 1 year of complete rest. Just the thought of being invalid terrorized her. One of her close friends explained her the whole situation and convinced her that this could be an opportunity for her to relax and enjoy the blessings of God, something which she would not have done in her whole life otherwise. Lying in bed gave Lucille a chance to know more about herself. During that year, she read lot of good books and heard lot of inspirational commentaries over the radio. Although she had heard all this before, but now it came to her with new meanings. She decided to think positively and live by the thoughts of joy, happiness, and good health. She formed the habit of counting her blessings every morning, something which she had never done before. Lucille valued the gift of life until she feared she was actually going. It is really so true that the positive attitude in life begins with self-unfoldment, and self-discovery begins by staying in constant touch with the Supreme Soul. There is no doubt about it that every time life receives new meaning and renews itself, it is from our own connection with the source of life, the indwelling Supreme Soul. The word meditation is becoming very popular these days. Most of the big companies are encouraging their employees to go for aerobics, yoga, and meditation sessions. You know why? Because the meditative unity with the indwelling self gives us a chance to know more about ourselves. Meditation is a systematic practice of knowing ourselves at the various levels of consciousness. I like what Swami Bhaskarananda used to say. When a person meditates, his concentrated thoughts, like a laser beam, penetrate through the inner layers of his mind and arrive at the bottom of the subconscious, where the sanskaras are. These hidden thoughts become conscious thoughts once again. This is how, through the regular practice of meditation, we can actually purify our mind by gradually getting rid of the old impressions and sanskaras. This is how a person becomes introduced to his hidden impulses and the conditioned self, and he develops the insight and the ability to make some changes in his life for better. The conditioned behavior becomes known to him, and the psychological transformation takes place at the conscious as well as at the subconscious levels of awareness. Real meditation is indeed an introduction to our own selves and liberation from the shadows of our conditioned behavior. Meditation practice has been glorified in all the religious traditions of the world as the final means for inner awakening, from an ordinary state of consciousness into increased consciousness, self-consciousness, cosmic consciousness, transcendental consciousness, and unity consciousness called Brahmi Chetana. With sustained, regular practice of meditation, life becomes quite spontaneous, creative, relaxed, productive, intuitive, and the enlightened way of living becomes very natural. The word yoga has been derived from the Sanskrit root word yuj, which literally means to bind, combine, and join together the psychic energies in order to experience a union and communion with the indwelling soul. Yogic unity in meditation brings a lot of transformation at the various levels of consciousness. It creates an alignment with the mind and body and helps the person to be more creative, productive, and useful in his work. It helps him to manifest the very best of his abilities. The individual attains better understanding of his own self and of other people. Anybody who practices yoga meditation with mantra, he definitely develops a harmonious interaction with other people because all his activities are guided from the yogic unity with the Supreme Self. It improves his relationship with other people and gives him a chance to know more about himself and about others. Understanding God, understanding this universe, understanding others, and understanding our own self is one and the same thing. Proper understanding of either one of them is the understanding of everything. There is a hidden Brahmanand in every Manushyanand, a Narayana in every Nara, a Purushottama in every Purusha, a Devta in every Dana, a Bhagwan in every Insan. I like what the great educationist Dr. Paul Bronton used to say. The only thing asked of every man is to turn about, change the direction of his outlook, and face the overself. Everyone is destined to come into its enlightenment once he has found this presence, felt this inspiration, and surrendered to this path. Similarly, we read in Bhagavad Gita, towards the end of the dialogue, when Arjuna feels surrendered in God, he is able to comprehend the essentiality of his own real nature. He becomes introduced to the secret codes of his programmed life and also the programmer. He comes to realize the supremacy of his pure, unconditioned nature and the infinity of his power. Arjuna is awakened to the marvelous unity which prevails at the heart of entire creation. He comes to realize that he is actually a co-creator with God. He understands that the establishment of morality and dharma is a cooperative enterprise of God and man. So, when he takes refuge in God with faith, willingness, and acceptance, his self-assumed notions, whims, and conditioned ideas all start blending into one essential dharma, and that is, accept to live in the consciousness of the presence of the divine and experience one's own immortality. It is the realization of Sat Chit Anand. So, when Shri Krishna gently inquires from Arjuna, have you heard attentively whatsoever we have discussed so far? Do you feel comfortable about your decision? Did you understand the meaning of my message? Arjuna's spontaneous answer, Smritir Labdha, is very significant. Smritir literally means memory, and Labdha means regain. Smritir Labdha literally means to remember something which has been forgotten for some reason. Arjuna admits openly and tells Shri Krishna that with your grace and blessing, I do feel enlightened, and I am trying to remember who I am and what is the purpose of my life. This is what we call the discovery of life in itself. When the person is aligned to the awareness of the Supreme Soul, he really becomes blessed with the experiential knowledge of his own immortality. His doubts are dispelled and his fears are destroyed. He moves forward without hesitation, quite intuitively, courageously, spontaneously, and harmoniously. I really like these lines from Gitanjali. It is the most distant course that comes nearest to thyself, and that training is the most intricate, which leads to the utter simplicity of a tune. The traveler has to knock at every alien door to come to his own, and one has to wander through all the outer worlds to reach the innermost shrine at the end. My eyes strayed far and wide, before I shut them and said, Here art thou. The question and the cry, Oh where? Melt into tears of 1,000 streams and deluge the world with the flood of the assurance, I am. Arjuna's reply definitely indicates his psychological transformation and inner stability. He feels awakened once again to the consciousness of the divine. Arjuna feels introduced to a higher truth. He is reminded of something which was forgotten, the essentiality of his real nature and the infinity of his potentials. His memory returns with a new concept of everything. He perceives that he has been reminded once again of his perennial relationship with the Supreme Soul. He comprehends the essentiality of his unconditioned nature and re-evaluates the entire situation. The very first word of his answer is Nashto Moha, means the veil of his conditioned identification has been removed. The life that seemed like a useless burden now feels like a great blessing to be used in the service of humanity. Arjuna feels very encouraged and enthusiastic about performing his duties. This is an experience of Atma-bodha, the knowledge of the self, the realization of the self at the deepest levels of consciousness. It is being awakened to one's own completeness. It is the experience of being restored to the wholeness in which the conditioned self resumes unity with the Supreme Self. Arjuna feels totally oriented to an absolutely new concept of life. His entire outlook is changed. He feels confident and integrated in all respect. The joy of understanding the self is indeed boundless, quite incomparable to anything else in the world. Realization of the Supreme Self and discovering the life in itself is the prerogative of each and every individual. This rediscovery of our own unconditional, pure, luminous nature is possible for everyone only if the person becomes introduced to the grace of the indwelling Supreme Self. The grace of the Supreme Lord is always with us, but it remains veiled underneath our own conditioned, individualized, egocentric nature. So, in the process of constant mantra repetition with faith and devotion, when the person takes refuge in God, the purity and the essentiality of our own divine nature unfolds itself and becomes available to us. This reminds me some beautiful lines by Umar Khayyam. There was a door to which I found no key. There was a veil past which I could not see. Some little talk a while of me and thee, there seemed, and then no more of thee and me, thee in me who works behind. I lifted my veil to find a lantern amid the darkness and cried, It's me in thee blind. This is a very personal experience, a subjective experience of the indwelling divinity at a specific level of inner awakening. It is the communion of Nara with his eternal companion Narayana. It is the transcendence of the conditioned self into the majesty of the Supreme Self. It is the transmutation of the limited identification into the infinite cosmic identification. The moment when a person accelerates himself to the purity of the Supreme Self, inner completeness is experienced, which liberates him from the limitations of his egocentric, conditioned behavior. It is really so true that as long as the conditioned self keeps holding to its separateness and egoistic individuality, the person becomes bound to move along by the instructions of his conditioned nature. But when he is introduced to the essentiality of his pure, luminous, unconditioned nature, he becomes the master and the co-creator of his own personality. We definitely feel helpless and weak as long as we live under the slavery of our conditioned behavior. But the moment when we take refuge in God, then the Supreme Power takes hold of us and works with us. There is no doubt about it. The great sages proclaim that the knowledge of the self is secretive because it remains foreign to us until we make some efforts with willingness, faith, and confidence. The moment when we take refuge in God with undivided faith and devotion, the acceptance from the Lord comes naturally and quite spontaneously. With constant repetition of mantra, when we meditate on Lord, our call is definitely received by the Supreme Divinity with special love and care. And the rich experience of intimacy with the Divine becomes real and experiential. The moment when the mutual love and friendship is strengthened with the indwelling God, the process of self-realization and self-discovery takes place very naturally and automatically. The intimate relationship with God is, in other words, the intimate relationship with our own self. The knowledge of the higher self promotes the knowledge of the individual self in all respect. It is indeed a fact that every individual is necessarily incomplete and fragmented until he resorts to the majesty of the Supreme Self. The confused efforts of a disintegrated person are the expressions of his inner turmoil, leaping in various directions with repeated search for satisfaction and inner completeness. A disintegrated person moves in confusion, back and forth, in search of something not quite clear to his own self. The performance of his work explains very clearly his dissatisfaction, restlessness, and inner emptiness. You know what? The radical cure for all his problems lies in his conscious reorientation and reassociation with the source of life. It is only the unity with the indwelling self which can help him to comprehend the prime truth in its completeness. It is the blessed experience of the consciousness of the Supreme Lord by the totality of his being which can help him in intimate understanding of the self. This is really so true that in general the faculty of reason deprives us from the comprehension of the powers of the infinitude. But the loving devotion with mantra jap prepares us for a blessed experience of the divinity with faith and willingness. It is the perennial consciousness of the infinite in thoughts, words, and deeds which makes the realization of the self to be very natural, spontaneous, and effortless. I like these lines from a great Chinese poet, Lao Tzu. Attain to utmost emptiness, cling single-heartedly to interior peace. While all things are stirring together, I only contemplate the return. For flourishing as they do, each of them will return to its root. To return to the root is to find peace. To find peace is to fulfill one's destiny. To fulfill one's destiny is to be constant. To know the constant is called insight. If one doesn't know the constant, one runs blindly into disasters. If one knows the constant, one can understand and embrace all. If one understands and embraces all, one is capable of doing justice. The regular, devoted repetition of mantra definitely helps us to know the existence of God and also experience our essential, unconditioned nature. This is how the mind opens itself effortlessly to the mysteries of the Supreme Soul. The purpose of self-realization is to learn to perform the ordinary duties of life with clarity, wisdom, and proper insight, while being in harmony with others. It is to be intuitive, precise, and learn to do ordinary things extraordinary well. With self-knowledge and self-understanding, a doctor becomes a good doctor. A teacher becomes a good, competent teacher, and a lawyer becomes a good, helpful lawyer, just because he learns to work in harmony with his unconditional cosmic awareness. Mantra jap definitely helps us to comprehend our special abilities in the field of work we choose, and then helps us to use our unique abilities by keeping in mind the global welfare. Since the mantra jap keeps us constantly connected with God and with everyone else around, the attitude of global welfare becomes very natural. This is really so true that our understanding of other people depends upon how much we understand ourselves. Our honesty in dealings, kindness, generosity, and compassion towards other people depends how much we are honest with our own self. It is the clear and honest understanding of our own self which allows for an honest and unconditional relationship with the rest of the creation. Since mantra jap keeps us connected with our own inner self, it brings a good understanding of ourselves and also of other people. Mantra jap brings people closer to each other and joins them into the common bond of unconditional spiritual intimacy. For example, the little children, they are so trusting, honest, forgiving, clean, and so simple at heart because they are honest with themselves and honest with others. There is no mask of artificiality. There is no mask of false values. And there is no mask of being someone else. Because they are in constant touch with God, their spontaneous behavior is based more upon the pure, unconditional nature of the indwelling self. Their behavior is always natural, warm, simple, innocent, forgiving, compassionate, and loving, simply because they are more closer to their true nature than the adults. This reminds me some beautiful lines. बच्चे मन के सच्चे, सारे जग की आँख के तारे, ये वो नन्हे फूल ये जो भगवान को लगते प्यारे। इंसान जब तक बच्चा है तब तक समझो सच्चा है, ज्यों ज्यों उसकी उम्र बढ़े तब तब मन पर मैल चढ़े। Means children are so pure at heart. Their love and relationship is so unconditional. They are so caring and forgiving. But as we grow older, our identification with ego becomes so strong that we really forget our true, pure, unconditional nature. Each person wears several masks and plays many conditioned roles in life. The pure self becomes wrapped in conditions and the life becomes confused, disintegrated, and we lose harmony in our thoughts, words, and deeds. People generally complain why human relations are so complex. But you know who can be the cause of this complexity? No one else. But we ourselves are the cause of this complexity. Just be yourself and let your pure self be your guide. Believe me, your life will become a blessing, relaxed, peaceful, and harmonious. So, in order to be who we really are, we have to remember that there is purity underlying our mask. It is the grasping of that purity, being one with that truth, which makes the human life really worth living. It is the grasping of that reality which connects us back to where we belong. It is the grasping of that truth which reveals our true nature to us and makes our life relaxed, enjoyable, creative, productive, and worth living. Almost all the prayers of the world talk about the necessity for self-awareness and self-realization. I like what saints usually say, we are born once from the womb of our mother. We are born a second time from our own self-unfoldment. To some people, self-unfoldment comes during their illness, from the desire to be free from physical pain. There are others who are inquisitive for understanding the mysteries of the soul. So, in process of knowing more about God, they become enlightened about the essentiality of their real nature. Knowing God and knowing your own self are not separate. Both are revealed by learning to live in the awareness of the self. No matter whatever the reason, it definitely brings substantial changes in our overall personality. And also, no matter whatever the method, they all correspond to the basic fact that self-discovery takes place from our own alignment with the indwelling Supreme Self. Mantra Jap is definitely the spark of positive energy, and it can surely enlighten us if we learn to direct its force properly. We should always remember that ignorance is darkness and self-knowledge is light, which is a human prerogative. It is essentially ours and always at our demand. It only needs to be revealed, and then it works by itself. Just as the ancient man knew that the fire existed in the flint, but friction was necessary to bring it out. Exactly like that, with the friction of mantra jap, when the flame of wisdom is lighted, self-unfoldment, self-realization, and self-enlightenment comes very effortlessly and naturally.